He paid me to pretend to be his wife, not for sex, but for a quiet dinner. But when his wallet fell open and out slipped an old photo of me, taken 7 years ago, before I ever became an escort, I knew this was no coincidence. I used to be an escort. I say that like it's an ex-job, like waitress or yoga teacher or florist, something you can hang up at the end of a long day, wipe clean from your hands. But the truth is, that life clings, like perfume you've worn too long, like fingerprints on skin, even after you've scrubbed yourself raw. That night was years ago, and I still dream in 5-star linens. He booked me through a private agency, the kind that doesn't use last names or faces, just initials and rates. High-end, discreet. The booking read JL, full evening, hotel suite, no overnights unless extended. I arrived at the Halcyon downtown, where the walls whisper and the carpets swallow your footsteps whole. Suite 1702. I remember the number because I always do. It's a habit, or maybe a survival instinct. He opened the door himself. No valet, no concierge hovering with a key, just him. The first thing I noticed was the suit. Charcoal gray, perfectly cut, not flashy, not designer shouting off the hanger, more like money that doesn't need to speak. His shoes matched. His eyes didn't, not in color. In stillness, they were too still. Men like him, the silent ones, they're either the safest or the most dangerous kind. You learn to read the difference fast. "Thank you for coming," he said, polite, almost warm, but he didn't reach for me, didn't look me over like inventory, just stepped aside and let me in. The suite smelled like bergamot and new money. There was already wine breathing in a crystal decanter, dinner plated under silver domes. The lighting was low, deliberately low, and a soft jazz record played like a heartbeat behind the walls. "This is beautiful," I said, my voice poised. I wore the black dress he'd requested. No lace, no red, classy, contained. Just Bond at first, just watched me. Not like a client eyeing his purchase. Not even like a man imagining undressing a woman. No, this was different. He looked at me like someone trying to memorize a ghost before it vanished again. Finally, he spoke. "Would you join me for dinner?" I blinked. Not a request for a shower, or champagne and massage. Not a safe word negotiated or a fantasy spelled out. Just dinner. "Yes," I said instinctively. We sat across from each other, two strangers with matching masks. I cut into seared duck breast with trembling precision while he poured the wine. He barely ate. He barely spoke. Occasionally he would look up and smile, soft and thin, like he was trying it on for size. I asked him what he did for work. He said finance and offered no more. I asked where he was from. He said, "Here once," and the answer hung between us like incense, fragrant and unfinished. After a while, I stopped asking. Instead, I watched him watch me. The way his eyes traveled over my face, like I was a favorite painting he hadn't seen in years. Not lustful, not cold, just there, seeing me more than any man ever had, and not in a way I wanted. At one point, I reached for my wine glass, and our hands brushed. He froze, not in shock, but reverence, like I was holy, and he was afraid to sin. That should have been the moment I left. It wasn't. Around midnight, he grew quiet, quieter. His eyes began to cloud, unfocused. The wine had done its work, and slowly, like the tide receding, he began to fade. He slumped into the plush armchair by the window, murmuring something I couldn't catch. I stood there, unsure. Some clients fall asleep mid-scene. It's not uncommon. Usually, I wait until the hour's done and slip out. Tonight, though, something urged me to leave early. I gathered my clutch, my coat, scanned the room for my shawl, and then I saw the jacket, his, draped over the back of the couch. I thoughtlessly grabbed it, ready to move it aside, and the wallet fell. The sound it made was soft, a private thud on carpet. I knelt down, intending only to scoop it up and place it back where it belonged. But it opened when I picked it up. It opened too easily. A name stared up at me. Not JL, not even the same initials. The ID was from another state. The photo was current. The man was real, realer than the one he pretended to be. My stomach turned. Then I saw it, tucked behind a MasterCard and a tattered library card. A photograph. It was worn around the edges, like it had been handled too often. A girl in sunlight, sitting on the curb, laughing at something off camera, her hair up in a messy bun, knees scraped from a fall. Me, 7 years ago. Before the hotels, before the name changes, before the silence became a second skin, I dropped the wallet like it burned me. He stirred in the chair, groaning softly. My hands shook as I stood. "Wake up," I said, my voice cracking. He didn't move. "Wake up," I said again, louder now, stepping closer, the wallet clenched in my fist. His eyes fluttered open, blurry at first. Then they focused. On me, on the thing in my hand. And the color drained from his face. "You weren't supposed to see that," he whispered. His voice was hoarse, like something raw had just torn loose from his chest. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run, but I stood frozen. Because what he said next wasn't a threat. It was something much stranger. I just needed to say goodbye, in my own way. He was fully awake now. Not groggy, not drunk, just still, like prey caught in the light and unsure whether to flee or speak. My hand shook as I held the wallet between us, as though it were a weapon and not just leather and paper. "What is this?" I asked, and my voice came out too small. It didn't sound like mine. He didn't answer right away, just stared at the photo I'd pulled from its sleeve, the one of me, 17, sunlight haloing my face like the gods had a sick sense of humor. "You weren't supposed to see that," he said again, but this time it wasn't apology. It was regret, not for what he'd done, but for being caught in it. I wanted to back away, to put space between us, but my feet wouldn't obey. I stayed rooted to that hotel carpet as he stood slowly, his movements careful, like I might bolt if he moved too fast. He didn't reach for me. He didn't have to. "Where did you get this?" I asked. His eyes flickered to the photo, then to my face. "You don't remember me, do you?" The question hit harder than it should have, like I owed memory to someone who had stalked me across time. "No," I said sharp, "I don't." He nodded, like he expected that, like he had always known this was a one-way story. 17. You lived in the red brick duplex on Crofton Street, apartment 2B. You used to leave your bike unlocked in the stairwell, and it drove the landlord crazy. Your bedroom window faced the alley. You'd leave it cracked open even in winter. I used to hear you sing when you thought no one was listening. I couldn't breathe. There's a certain kind of terror that doesn't announce itself with screaming or running. It arrives in silence, in the slowing of the breath, in the sudden awareness of how small you are in a room with someone who's known you longer than you've known yourself. "I lived across the hall," he said simply. "I was 32 then. You were you." I dropped the wallet. "You watched me?" His face changed at that. Not guilt, not shame, something more pathetic, like confession with some form of absolution. "You were beautiful," he said. but not in the way you think, not the way men usually mean it. You were God. You were fire, loud and messy and full of life. I used to sit on my balcony and listen to you scream at your mother on the phone, like every word might rip the sky open. And then, the next morning, you'd be outside helping the super carry groceries up the stairs. I stared at him. I was 17. I was a child. He saw something break in my expression, and for the first time, his voice wavered. I never touched you. I never said anything. But then one day, you were gone. That much was true. I'd vanished from Crofton Street like ash in the wind. No note, no goodbye. Just one night, I packed a duffel and walked out the door and never looked back. I thought I'd buried her, that girl, the one who sang through cracked windows and fought with the world like she might win. She died quietly in someone else's bed, and now here she was again, staring up from a stranger's wallet. I looked for you, he whispered, not hard at first, just curious. And then I saw your photo on the site. It was you. Older, sure, but the same eyes, the same mouth, like something I'd never gotten over. My stomach churned. So you booked me? He nodded. I didn't know what I wanted, he said. Maybe to see you again. Maybe to, I don't know, say goodbye to a version of myself I couldn't carry anymore. I sat down. Not gracefully, not like the kind of woman who knew how to perform stillness, just collapsed, bones folding under memory and fear. You had me pretend to be your wife, I said, trying to make sense of it. It wasn't a fantasy, he said. It was peace. I wanted one night where I could imagine what might have been, if the world had been different, if I had met you later, if you had stayed, if I had stayed. My voice cracked like porcelain. You would have waited for me to turn 18 and knock on your door? He didn't answer. That silence told me everything. I wanted to cry. I wanted to scream. But more than anything, I wanted to forget. And I couldn't, because the worst part wasn't the photo. It wasn't the lie. It was the fact that I had played along. I'd sat across from him in that suite. I'd smiled and tilted my head, laughed at his mild jokes, let him watch me pour wine like I was his. I'd played wife for a night, not knowing I was acting out a memory he'd written for us years before we spoke. I'm done, I said, standing too fast, my legs unsteady. We're done. He didn't stop me. He didn't apologize again. I never meant to hurt you, he murmured, but obsession doesn't come with good intentions. It comes with quiet dinners and lies dressed in suits. It comes with old photographs folded too many times. I walked out of that suite barefoot, heels in hand. No grace left in me, and as the elevator doors closed, I saw him one last time, standing exactly where I'd left him, like a man in a museum, trapped behind glass. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't eat the next day. And when I closed my eyes, I saw 17-year-old me again. Not laughing this time, not singing, just staring. Like she finally realized someone had always been watching. I didn't take the elevator to the lobby. I stabbed the button for the 3rd floor and got off somewhere in the middle, like it might buy me time. Like panic couldn't follow me down a carpeted hallway lined with ice machines and silence. I leaned against the wall. My chest was tight, breath shallow, throat lined with glass. In my hand, the wallet. I hadn't left it behind like I thought. Some part of me, some traitorous, masochistic part, still had it clutched like a talisman. It felt heavier now. Not from weight, but meaning I opened it again. It was a simple black thing. Nothing remarkable. But the contents were curated, like a shrine. Driver's license. A few crisp bills. Hotel key card. A strip of passport photos. His kids, probably. 2 girls and a boy. Blonde. Smiling. Then the picture. Mine. I hadn't seen that photo in over a decade, and yet my body reacted as if it were taken yesterday. My pulse tripped. My hands grew cold. It wasn't a professional photo. It wasn't even posed. I knew exactly when it was taken, a summer afternoon, 7 years ago. I was sitting on the curb outside Crofton Street, my Walkman in my lap, hair a mess, face bare. My mother had just kicked me out for the 4th time that month. I was laughing at something my friend Devin had said, something dumb and mean about her ex. I remember looking up mid-laugh and seeing something. A flicker, maybe. The click of a shutter? A glint of glass? But I'd thought nothing of it. Until now, he took that photo. Back then, before I ever ran. Before I knew how fast a girl could disappear. He had it all this time. I slid down the hallway wall, knees against my chest, the wallet open beside me like an autopsy. I was trying to understand something you shouldn't ever have to understand. How a version of you can live in someone else's pocket, frozen in time, worshipped in secret. That photo was stolen, not like theft from a purse, but from memory, from ownership. It was mine that moment, mine and Devin's, loud and ridiculous and ours. And he'd stolen it, captured it, curated it into a fantasy, and then he'd bought me. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a lonely man trying to feel something real. This was calculated, tracked, preserved. He'd watched me grow into a ghost and waited for the day I'd become available for purchase. I thought about going back up to the suite. I thought about confrontation, rage, shouting. But something stopped me. It wasn't fear. It was futility. Because what do you say to someone who's already built a shrine from your life? What do you undo? You don't reclaim something that's been replicated and worshipped in secret for 7 years. You just walk away. Or run. I stood, palms sweaty, breathing shallow. I went down to the lobby, dropped the wallet on the concierge's desk without a word, and walked out into the city night. The air was cold, biting, the kind that burns clarity into your lungs. I walked 6 blocks barefoot. I didn't notice the pain until the next morning, when my heels were raw and bleeding. I didn't go home. I didn't go back to my apartment, to the silk sheets and the wine rack and the closet full of illusion. I went to a friend's couch, slept in my clothes, woke up screaming twice. The second time, I sat up and wrote down everything I could remember. The street, the suite, the shape of his eyes, the names on the cards in his wallet, his children, their smiles, the brand of cologne he wore, the tremor in his hand when he said, I just needed to say goodbye. I didn't call the agency. I didn't tell anyone. Not yet, because I wasn't sure what the story even was. Was I a victim? A warning? A curiosity? Was he dangerous? Or just broken? And the worst part, a part of me still wasn't sure he meant harm. A part of me, the one trained to soothe, to mirror, to rationalize, kept whispering. Maybe he was just lonely. Maybe he really loved you. Or thought he did. But then I'd remember the photo, taken without consent, carried for years, used to bring me back without ever saying a word. That wasn't love. That was possession. And I was done being owned. The agency texted me the next morning. Client JL sent a follow-up tip. No notes. Hope the evening went well. V. I stared at the screen, bile rising, a tip, the whole night. His silence, his lies, the photo, reduced to a monetary gesture. I imagined him sitting in that hotel suite after I left, pressing a button on his phone to say thank you for the performance, like I was still in costume. Like nothing had broken. I didn't respond. I turned off the phone, but silence doesn't mean peace. Sometimes it means pressure, tension, the kind that makes your body hum even when the room is still. For the first 3 days, I tried to pretend it hadn't happened. I scrubbed my skin, deleted the contact, blocked the number, didn't go online, didn't work, but pretending is a muscle, and mine was tired. By day 4, I found myself sitting at the diner on 6th and Leland, the kind of place with chipped mugs and waitresses who refill your coffee before you ask. The kind of place where I used to hide between clients when I was younger, when I still believed that distance could keep you clean. I was halfway through a burnt grilled cheese when it hit me. He'd remembered everything, my clothes, my laugh, the songs I hummed when I thought no one was around, my fights with my mother, my favorite bike path. He had curated a fantasy from my former self, preserved her, played her back to me in a suite filled with linen and jazz. But I couldn't remember him. That's what unnerved me. He said we were neighbors, across the hall, that he heard me sing, that he watched me grow up. But my mind came up blank. No clear face, no moment. Just a shape, maybe. A man in the background. A shadow I never turned toward. That meant he had always been behind me, never beside. That made me want to scream, because how much of my life had been his now? Did he remember what I wore the day I ran away? Did he know what time my lights usually went out? Did he recognize my scent, the way some men remember perfume? He hadn't just followed me to the Escort site. He had waited for me to appear there. That wasn't coincidence. That was devotion wrapped in delusion. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized he hadn't been trying to say goodbye. He'd been trying to complete something. I was the final scene, the girl who vanished, returning in the form of someone he could now afford, a woman for hire, a body dressed in memory. And the dinner, the wine, the role play, that was his ending, his closure. One last script to play out before retiring the shrine. But something went wrong. I found the photo. I broke the illusion. He hadn't wanted me to see him. He wanted me to be her. Silently, completely, without knowing, without resistance. And that's when I understood what had truly happened in that room. Not assault, not threat, something murkier. He didn't want power over my body. He wanted authorship over my story. He wanted to own how I ended, but I refused to be his epilogue. So I did something reckless. Maybe selfish. Maybe cathartic. I searched his real name. It took time, but eventually I found it. A corporate profile. A few real estate transactions. A boring trail of public records and financial credibility. And then something else. A donation to a local youth arts program. One I'd been a part of at 17. A photography grant, to be specific. He'd helped fund the program. He'd probably seen me perform at the student exhibit. I wanted to throw up. That picture had been taken at one of the outdoor gallery nights. There were other photos. I'd never seen them. But someone across the hall. Someone who stood in the shadows and decided he could write me into a future he'd invented without my permission. He didn't love me. He loved who I had been to him. And that distinction, that awful, bone-deep distinction, was what finally snapped something in me. I no longer felt scared. I felt stolen. So I called the agency, not to report him, but to cancel myself. "I'm done," I said. The woman on the other end didn't flinch. She probably heard it all the time. But when I said it, I meant something different. I wasn't just quitting the job, I was reclaiming the narrative. I wasn't going to be a character in someone else's devotion play ever again. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, remembering all the moments I'd let pass without notice. All the apartments I thought were safe. All the windows I left open, songs I sang, unguarded hours I never thought twice about. I didn't feel guilt. I felt grief. Grief for a version of myself that had always been vulnerable, always exposed, always being recorded in someone else's secret memory. No more. The mask had slipped. His, yes, but mine too. And what I saw beneath it? Not weakness, not shame, but fire. Because if he had been watching all along, then he'd seen me fall. Now, he was going to watch me burn. The second time I vanished, I did it differently. The first time was all panic. A teenage escape, a duffel bag zipped with trembling hands. Tears, I didn't have time to cry. That first vanishing was chaos and bruised hope. But this one was orchestration, precision, a ritual. I deleted every trace of the job, wiped the email, closed the accounts, even the burner phone. I drove an hour out of the city just to snap the SIM card in half and toss the pieces into separate trash bins like I was burying something cursed. I didn't tell anyone I was leaving, not even the few who still knew the name I'd been using. There was a freedom in that. No goodbyes meant no explanations. No explanations meant no ghosts clinging to my ankles, demanding closure. I packed quietly. Nothing expensive. Just a duffel again. Poetic maybe. Jeans. A few tops. Cash. Neatly stacked in the lining of a makeup bag. The only thing I hesitated over was a photograph. Not that one. A different one. Taken in a booth somewhere near Lake Geneva, back when I was 19 and pretending to be a tourist. Wind in my hair, tongue out, eyes squinting in fake sunlight. A picture I'd taken for me. I kept that one. Everything else stayed behind. That night, I left the apartment key on the counter. Lights off, windows open. The air outside was thick with spring, damp, and smelling of rain that hadn't fallen yet. It was nearly midnight when I stepped outside. No one saw me, except maybe him. And maybe that's why I paused. At the corner, at the intersection of two lives. I imagined him, still in that hotel suite, playing the night over in his head like a prayer, rewriting the ending. Maybe in his version I'd smiled when I saw the photo. Maybe I'd cried and asked if he'd loved me all that time. Maybe I'd kissed him softly, called him by his real name. But this wasn't his story anymore. This was mine. And in my version, the girl doesn't get trapped in someone else's memory. She doesn't become a symbol or a souvenir. She leaves. She survives. She starts over. I boarded a bus at 1:05 a.m. heading west. No questions asked. No names given. I watched the city fade into shadow through streaked windows, neon signs blurring like the past trying to hold on. I didn't cry. Tears are for grief. This was rebirth. For the first few weeks, I didn't speak unless I had to. I rented a room in a little roadside motel where the carpet smelled like mildew and the walls were the color of faded newspaper. I got a job at a diner pouring coffee and pretending to be unremarkable, and it worked. No one looked twice. For the first time in years, I wasn't being watched. There were no eyes tracking my movement across a room, no silence loaded with expectation. No old neighbors with quiet smiles and old photos tucked away in their wallets like pressed flowers from a garden they weren't allowed to touch. I disappeared into the ordinary, and it was beautiful. I learned to enjoy the quiet, the real kind, the kind that doesn't follow you with questions. I read books I used to love. I bought secondhand clothes and didn't worry about how I looked in them. I walked without checking who was behind me. I stopped imagining myself through someone else's lens. I became anonymous. But anonymity isn't emptiness. It's freedom. Freedom to rebuild, not erase. Freedom to be whole again. And in the safety of that quiet, I began to ask myself things I hadn't dared to before. Who was I without the men who paid to name me? Who was I without the clients, the roles, the stories shaped around desire that was never mine? Who was I if no one was watching? The answer wasn't immediate, but it started with small things: a library card, a notebook, a cheap camera. Yes, a camera, because maybe I needed to take the lens back, to reclaim the gaze. I began photographing strangers at a distance, not for intrusion, not for obsession, but for humanity. Wrinkled hands holding coffee cups, children asleep on their parents' shoulders, lovers laughing through car windows. Nothing posed. Everything real. I kept them all, printed them in black and white, and pinned them to the wall above my bed. And one day I realized something. He never got this version of me. He got the girl, the wounded one, the one he could rewrite. But the woman? The woman who vanished twice and came back to life? That story was mine. Entirely. And no one would ever carry it in a wallet again. It started like any other day. Rain against the motel window, burnt coffee in a chipped mug, the hum of traffic on the nearby road. I had learned to love mornings like that. Slow, uneventful, unobserved, the kind that feel like recovery. I was folding napkins behind the counter when the paper came in. We only kept one, a single copy, delivered late, barely read. The kind of paper with smudged ink and too many ads for roofing companies and yard sales. But that morning, a headline caught me. Not the headline, really. The photo. His face? I froze. The caption was brief. The kind you don't read so much as absorb. Local businessman found dead in apparent suicide. There was no fanfare, no mystery, just a name, a location, a quiet line about family notified, no foul play suspected. It was him, the man with the quiet suit, the man with the stolen photo, the man who had kept me in his memory like a pressed petal he could never bear to crush. I stared at the newsprint until the ink blurred. I wasn't sure what I felt. Relief? Grief? Something colder, maybe. Something like stillness. I walked out back into the gravel lot where the sun was starting to burn through the cloud cover, lit a cigarette I didn't want, held it between fingers that had once poured wine in a suite while pretending to be a man's wife. I wondered what his last night had been like. Was he alone? Had he looked at the photo one last time? Had he thought of me? I wanted to believe he hadn't, that he'd let go of the fantasy, at least at the end, that his last thoughts were of his children, the ones whose photos lived beside mine in that too-crowded wallet. But I didn't know. I would never know. And that, strangely, was the only justice I got. There wouldn't be a letter, or an apology, or a final confession sent to a P.O. box in a dusty town. No grand explanation, just a death, and the story buried with him. I took the newspaper back to my room, folded the article neatly, not out of sentiment, but ritual. A record. A tombstone in ink. I placed it in a shoebox beneath my bed, next to the photographs I'd taken in the week since I left. People. Real people. Unaware. Unwatched. Unpossessed. Alive. There was a lesson somewhere in his death, but I didn't try to define it. I'd stopped trying to make sense of everything. Not all stories need morals. Some are just moments. Moments you carry, like weight, like scars, like a photograph that shouldn't have existed but did. I hadn't cried when I left, but that night I did. Not for him. For her. For the girl on the curb, squinting into the sun, never knowing someone was making her immortal for all the wrong reasons. I cried because she deserved better, because she never had a choice in the story. But now I did. So I opened my notebook, the one I used for captions now, and I wrote a single line under the date. He's gone. I'm not. That has to be enough. And I meant it. I turned out the light. The room held me like a secret I was finally ready to keep. Not a victim, not a fantasy, not a ghost. Just a woman with a camera and a future of her own making.